I'd like to walk you through the steps necessary to create a 2D view of a workstation in which a worker is standing facing the bench with an outstretched arm, and there's an arc showing how far this worker can reach in front of the body without bending or twisting. And in the top view, it shows how far the worker can reach and touch the surface of the workbench without bending or twisting. And the critical point here is I'm talking about how far they can reach and touch the surface, not how far they can reach with an outstretched arm, such as we see down here, but rather how far they could reach in here and touch the edge of the, how far they can reach from the edge of the workbench. The workbench we're going to construct is 90 centimeters high, 100 centimeters deep, and 200 centimeters wide. The worker is going to be based on a 5 percentile female stature based on National Health Survey data. That's 150.4 centimeters, and it's going to be someone with average body proportions. I'm going to use AutoCAD to construct this view. I'll hide this. And by the way, this is what it would look like if you were to construct this on AutoCAD using a Mac version, showing the top view, the side view, and over here the layers in which I put these different components. We'll talk about layers as we proceed with the drawing. So I'll hide this. I'll come over here. I already have AutoCAD up and running, I hope. And there we are. And this is what you'll see when you first open AutoCAD on the Windows version. And we're just going to come up here and click on Start Drawing, and we'll be ready to go. What you see is the black drawing space. This is the default drawing space on AutoCAD in most versions. Our tool palettes are across the top, a command bar down here at the bottom, and then we've got some tool settings down here such as ortho movements, snap, line thickness, and so forth. It opens in a 2D view. You can see the X and Y coordinates over here. So we're going to kind of draw with respect to this origin. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Since I'm making a workbench that has all right angles in it, it will be helpful if I come down here and we find this little symbol down here that says ortho mode, and I can turn that on by clicking on it, and you'll see the command down here says ortho on, and that will constrain my movements of my cursor to right angles or parallel to the Y and X axis. And that'll simplify things for making my bench. So I'm going to start out with a side view of the bench. I'll get the polyline tool, and I can start anywhere. Oh, excuse me, before I start that, one thing that's a good idea, not a requirement, but it's a good idea, is to set the units. Now AutoCAD works in arbitrary units, so you can just, you don't have to worry about this, but if you export something from AutoCAD and you try to import it, it's important that you know which units you're working in. So let's just check and make sure that the default units are consistent with what we want to use. So I'm going to type units, the command, and units, hit return. It opens the unit window, and it says we're working in decimal units. That's fine. Precision, it says it's going to give us 4 digits to the right of the decimal place. So if we're working in centimeters, that'll get us down to the nearest micron, which is far more precision than what we need for this. So I'm going to change that to 0.10 or to the nearest millimeter, and that'll be fine. I come down a little bit further and you see that the default here is in inches. So I'm going to change that to centimeters. And again, this really doesn't affect anything unless we're exporting or importing things into our drawing, but it's just good practice to make sure that's set. Okay, so now I'll come back and create my, one more thing, sorry. I want to actually define my layers. One of the neat features of AutoCAD is it allows you to put different parts of your drawing in layers. And if you come up here to the tool palettes on top, you'll see one that says layers, and you'll see one under layers. There's a place here to click on the window. Oops, let's see. I'm looking at, oops, wrong palette. Come over here to layer properties and click here. It opens the layers window, and I want to create a new layer. So I'll come up here to these little, looks like a little stack of papers there with a star by it. I'll click on it. And you can see it adds a layer here. It names it layer 1. I'm going to just go ahead and call this bench. And that's all I really need to do, but I'm going to call it bench. I'm going to put underscore 100 x 200 x 90. In case I put multiple benches in it, then I'll know the size of the bench that I'm working with. One more thing that I can do while I'm working on this bench is I can set the color so that it distinguishes it from other parts of the drawing. And if I come over here, you can see one of the columns says color. If I come down and click on this, it'll open the color choices. And let's just arbitrarily make that kind of a bright green or light colored green. Okay. Okay, great. And then one final thing, we'll just make this layer active. And you come over here and you can see some of these layers have checks by them. So I'm going to put a check, click in front of this till I get a check, and that means that layer is active. And everything I draw now, while that layer is active, will be in the bench layer. Very good. Now I can hide this guy. If I can find the right button, I'll just click on the X there and close it. Now I'll come back and try it. I'll start getting my polyline tool. I'll come over here. I'm going to just come up here away from my axis a little bit, and I'll click on this, and I'll come up, and I want to come up 90 centimeters. Now right away you see I run out of space, so I need a little more room for this. So I'm just going to hit escape to start back up a little bit, and I'm going to use my center mouse wheel to zoom out, pull this down, and I'll start again. Get my polyline tool. I could do this without interrupting my polyline tool, but sometimes I bump the wrong mouse button and I end up in my line somewhere where I didn't really want it. So now I can go up here. Still not quite there. I can just tap my mouse wheel a little bit maybe and pull this down and come back up. Yeah, I don't know how it worked. And I could kind of juggle this back and forth till it says exactly 90, or I could set my snap functions to make this move in 5 centimeter increments, but I can also just type 90 and it comes up to that point. Then I'll come across. It said the bench is 100 centimeters deep, so I'll go 100. I'll come back down. I want to come back down 90. I want my legs to be 5 centimeters wide, so I'll come over here 5. Okay, then I'll come back up here. And I want a top to be 5 centimeters, so I'll just come back up 85 since the top is at 90. 85. And now I want the next leg to be 5 centimeters. And I've got 5 centimeters to the other leg. The top is 100 centimeters, so I'm going to come over 90. Now I'll come back down, and I'll come down 85. Okay, and now I can come over here and position it over the other mouse, or I could type 5, or I can just type C for close. And there's my end view of the bench. Okay, now I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and I want to make my top. And it's very important when we make these 2D views that the top be perfectly aligned with the side view, and that the dimensions be the same. And to facilitate that, excuse me, I'm going to use the rectangle tool. And I'll just come down here and it says specify the first corner, and I'll actually specify that first corner by snapping. And by snapping, I'm going to position my cursor over that upper left-hand corner of my end view, click on it, and then I'll just come up and type 100 for the width and 200 for the height. And there's my top view. Now they're right next to each other, so I want to spread them apart a little bit. And I'll do that using the move command. So I'm just going to type move. It says select object. I'll click on the bench and I'll hit return again to tell it that I'm done selecting objects. It says select a base point. I can select any point on the bench, but I'll just come down here and select the bottom point. And if I just come up here till I click the top point, that'll automatically move it up 200 centimeters. And now the top's kind of hanging over the top, but that's okay. We'll take care of that in a minute. So now I've got a side and a top view of my bench. Next thing I'm going to do is construct my worker. But before I do that, I'm going to make a new layer for the worker. And I'm going to start out with my 5 percentile female worker. I will get back to my layer palette here. Let's see, where'd my layer palette go? Layer properties. There it goes. Okay, and I'll come up here and I'm going to click on the new layer button. And I'm going to type F5 for my female. And let's make the color for this something a little different than the bench. So maybe we'll make this let's make it kind of a bright pinky color here. so it shows up. I'll go OK. And now I got to make that layer active. I'll do that by clicking on it. So now I should be ready to construct my female. And I'm going to start with a side view. Let me get rid of this layers palette or window since it's in my way. I can open it again when I need it. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on the bench. Maybe move this a little more to the center. It's really helpful if you make this as large as you can. Okay. Now, when I create my stick figure, I'm just going to go ahead and use the line tool. And I'm going to start down here in the lower right or lower left corner, excuse me, of the bench. And I want to leave some space here because people have some thickness, and we're going to construct a stick figure representation, so I need to leave some thickness for that. And I'm going to leave 10 centimeters. So I'm going to start from this edge, and I'll come down until it snaps on that corner. I'm going to come across to the left, and I still have my ortho command on, so it makes it easy to move horizontally. And I'm going to type 10. And now I got to come up and make a line that goes from the floor to the shoulder. And based upon our anthropometric data, we know for 5 percentile stature and average body proportions, that's 123 centimeters. So I'll just type 1, 2, 3. And I've located my shoulder, or the midpoint between the shoulders, technically. Now I'm going to come out horizontally to make a line representing an outstretched arm. And again, based on our anthropometric data, we know that should be 66.2 centimeters. And I'll hit return to tell it I'm done. And there's my line representing the worker. Now, next thing I want to do is create that arc that I mentioned to represent how far somebody can reach in front of them. The easiest way to do that is start out by making a circle. So I'll come up and click on the circle. And I'll locate the center of my circle on the shoulder. And then I'll come out until I snap on the end of the arm. And now I've got a circle. And the right side of that circle shows how far somebody could reach in front of the body. And of course, nobody can really turn their arm around to reach perfectly behind them in all these different positions. So we want to get rid of that part of the circle above them. So I'm going to use the trim command. But to use the trim command, I've got to be able to specify the points I want to trim off from that circle. So I'm going to temporarily create another line here, starting from the shoulder and come up to the top of the shoulder. And I'll just click that so it intersects the shoulder. And then I'll hit return to tell it I'm done. And now I will type TR for trim. Or I could type out the whole trim, but that's just a shortcut. And it says select object to trim or shift select to extend. So I'm going to select, oops, sorry. Let me do this back up. I got ahead of myself. So I'll just come over here and click on the circle behind the body, and we're all set. And now I will hit return to tell it I'm done. And now I can delete that line that I created here because I was just there temporarily to guide my trim command. So I will type E for erase, and that's gone. I had to select it first. It was already selected, so when I typed erase, it disappeared. Okay, so there's my side view. Let's go ahead and make our top view now. So now I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'll pan down so I can see the top of my bench. And let's go ahead and make our stick figure on top, and we're going to locate the worker in the center of the bench. Again, I'll get my line tool, and I'll come down here till I find the center of the bench. And you can see it finds the corners, but it's not finding the center. So I could actually put a line in here to locate the center. Or alternatively, I can come down here and find my snap controls. If I right click on that and go to snap settings, there's something here called object snap. And you can see this determines what points this will snap on. And I'm going to click on the midpoint. Okay, that looks good. I'll type OK. Now notice when I get my line tool and come back up here, it will find that midpoint for me, and I don't have to draw any extra lines. So I'll click on that point. I'll come out 10 centimeters. And then I'll come across from the center of the body to the shoulder, and that will be, let me check the distance here, that will be from center to shoulder 19.4 centimeters. Okay, and now I'll come forward and make my right arm sticking out in front of us. That's going to be 66.2. Same as it was in the bottom. Hit return, and there's my top view. Now I can go ahead and create an arc here to show how far I can reach on the surface of this bench, but I can't use the total length of the arm here, because you can see the arm at shoulder height is able to reach out further horizontally than it can over the surface of the bench. So what I'm going to do is get the line tool again, and I'm going to come down here and find this intersection. It'll help if I zoom out a little bit on this, maybe pan down so I can see this. And I'll just hover over this, and you'll see it shows an X and it says intersection, so that tells me it's going to snap in that intersection. Now I will come up, and I'll have to kind of pan here as I do this and come up all the way across that bench and just hit the mouse button to end that line and hit return to tell it I'm done. Okay, so now I've defined the distance from the shoulder that somebody can actually reach out in front of them and touch the surface of the bench. And that's what I'm going to use to create my reach limits here. So let me zoom in on it a little bit, kind of center this. I'll get the circle command, come over here to the right shoulder, click on that, come out here to the intersection with the arm and that vertical line I created, and I'll click, and that gives me the circle and the shows me how far somebody could reach on this bench. And again, I want to get rid of this part of the bench behind me, and I don't really need that line that I just created. That was just for construction purposes. So first thing I'll do is click on that line, type E for erase, get rid of that. Then I'm going to type TR for trim again, and I'll come over here and click on this part of the arc back here, and it's gone. And I'll hit return until I'm done trimming. Now I've created the arc for the right arm. Now I need to create one for the left arm, and I can repeat this process, or I can just simply use the move command or copy command, copy what I've already done. So I'm going to blow this up a little bit. I'll type CO, that is the shortcut for copy, and it says select object. So I'm going to start out selecting this link that goes from the center of the body to the right shoulder, and it says specify a base point. So I'll come down here and take the right shoulder, and I'm going to move this line, move a copy of this line so the right shoulder is now centered over the center of the body. And now I've got a line that goes from the center of the body to the left shoulder. Okay, I'll hit return to tell it I'm done. Now I'm going to hit copy again, or type copy again. Type return, select object. So I'm going to select the right arm and the arc, and I will type return. And now it says specify base point, so I'll take the right shoulder, and I will go up to the left shoulder, and now I've made a copy, and it wants to keep on making copies, and I'll type return to tell it I'm done. So now you can see I've got my bench and my stick figure representing the worker and the bench. And you'll see if I come back and open my layers properties, if I wanted to, I could hide the worker, or I could hide the bench. I can't actually hide the worker without, let's see if I hide the bench. There's a little light here. It's okay, so there I hid the bench, and then I'll turn it back on. I can't hide the 5% or the F5 layer because it's active, but if I come back here and make the base layer active, now I can hide the worker if I want. Okay. Okay, and the next one of the things I'm going to ask you to do on your own is to create a layer for a 95 percentile male stature and average proportions. And just to get you started on that, the first thing you'll want to do is create a new layer, and you'll want to name that, give that a name, and we're going to name it M95, M95. Okay, and we'll probably want to give that a color, so let's maybe make that a light blue. Okay, and okay, and that means you'll be good to go, and go ahead and make that layer active, and you construct the male the same way we constructed the female. We'll do it in the same position, and then you can just turn the layers on and off and see the difference, or you can superimpose the male on top of the female. The last thing I want to show you, though, pertains to putting dimensions on this. So I want to show some of the key dimensions here that would, inform an engineer or somebody who's in charge of workplace facilities where to place things. And we might be concerned with where to place things so that you can reach them with both hands, so that you can reach it with the right arm or the left arm, or in some cases where you might want to put something so somebody couldn't reach it, or at least reach it accidentally without deliberately reaching for it. And I always use the example of a keyboard here that you want to reach with both hands, maybe a mouse that you could reach in these outer limits with the right or left hand. And then that hot cup of coffee you start out the day with, you probably want to set outside the reach limits here so you don't accidentally bump it and tip it over. Excuse me. So the next thing we're going to do is create a new layer for dimensions. So I'll come up here and again tell a new layer, and I'm going to make this F5 DIM, and I will hit, or that's fine, I'll hit return. And let's make these dimensions lines, let's just make them white. Okay, and now we got to make that layer active, so I'm going to click on this until I get a little check in front of it. Okay, and we're good to go with dimensions. So I'll hide this. And let's go ahead and put these dimensions on here. So I want to, get, like I said, the key dimensions. So I'm not going to worry about the dimensions of the worker, the stick figure I used, because I can always look those up. The people who are going to be laying out the work don't really care what those dimensions are. What they want to know is what these ranges are of where people can reach on the bench. So you can see up here is dimension palette. And I've got linear dimensions, and I've got leaders, and a number of things like options for dimensions. But all we really need to worry about is the linear dimensions. And this is really a neat tool in most drafting programs because it just really makes it easy to create these extension lines and dimension lines and control the sizes of them. So let's just go ahead and click on this, and I'll start out maybe doing the height of the workbench, and I'll zoom in on this a little bit. And come down here and snap on that lower right corner and come up to the upper right corner. Just pull this out here like this, and I want to try to make sure that I put all of my dimensions off on the side. Never put a dimension on top of the drawing unless you absolutely have to. And there's my dimension. Now, one problem, it's too small to see, because that's just a function of the default setting. So we can change that really easily. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to type the command dim style. And when I do that, it's going to open a window, and you'll see over here on the far right is something called modify. Now, if you're working the Windows version, it'll be over here on the right. If you're working on a Mac version, you'll find there's a little gear shaped thing down here that you have to click on to change these. I don't know why they decided why they're not consistent between the two platforms. But anyway, if you click on that, it'll open all the dimension settings, and there are gazillion dimension settings and we aren't going to worry about them all. There's a couple we want to focus on. If we go to fit, there's an overall scale function that will change everything. So I'm just going to come down here and you can see the default is 1. So I'm just, by experience, I'm going to guesstimate that as 20. And then I'll come over here, primary units, and there's something called precision, and that tells me that it's going to put again, 4 decimal places, or 4 digits to the right of the decimal. It's far more precision than we need. So we'll just change that to 1 decimal. So it gets us down to like nearest millimeters. And now I'll come down here and type OK. And again, close. And now you can see everything increases in size. It shows 90 centimeters for the height of the bench. It shows the arrowheads. It shows the extension lines with a gap between the extension lines and the work object, and overshooting the extension lines extended beyond the dimension lines. So that's the dimension for the height of the bench. Let's come up here to the top view now and get some of these other dimensions. And where possible, we'll put common dimensions between the two drawings and try to, again, minimize how much we put dimensions on top of the drawing. So I'll come over here and get my linear dimension tool, and I'm going to start out here getting these limits between that represents how far you can reach something with both hands without bending or twisting. And I'll come out here and you can see that shows 74.2 centimeters. Now I'm going to repeat this, and I'm going to click on linear again, come up here and get the outer limit. This would be where you can reach with either hand but not both, and that's 151.8 centimeters. And then I'll come up here and I'll get the full width of the bench, and I'll try to keep the spacing of these nice and consistent. And actually there's a command you can use, dimension space, which will allow you to actually set those to exact dimensions. Okay, now similarly we're interested in how far somebody can reach in front of them. Again, I'll get the linear dimension tool, and I'm going to come down here and click on this lower left corner, and then I'll come up here and click on the intersection of these two arcs, which represents the maximum distance you can reach with both hands. And as you'll notice, as I pull, depending on which way I go with this, it'll determine whether it sets a dimension on the X or Y axis. So I'm going to pull this down because I want the horizontal distance. And again, I'll keep the spacing fairly consistent. And that shows the distance is 44.4. And I'll do one more. I'll come up here and click on the lower left-hand corner and on the lower right-hand corner and pull it down. And again, kind of keep the spacing consistent. And that shows 100 centimeters, which I knew because that's what I created it. So it just verifies that I got the dimensions right. And now I can zoom out. And there you can see my drawing. I can come back. Let me blow it up a little bit. Now if I go back and open my layers window, I'll make the base layer active here by putting a check in front of it. And now you can see that I can hide my dimensions if I want. Turn them back on. I can hide the dimensions. I can hide my 5% female. Where's that 5 there? I'll hide that one. She's gone. And then I can even hide the bench if I want to. There we are. So the last thing would be to make the figure for the 95 percentile male, based on 95 percentile male stature. And I'm going to let you do that on your own. It's just an extension of the 5 percentile female, except we're going to use different dimensions that would correspond to, let's see, this. Okay, so my dimensions. Okay, there are dimensions. Okay, so we're back in business. Okay, good luck.